We have a robust network of vibrant innovators across the globe, 55 countries, including the US, of leaders who are really the charge and the change and the transformation. But here we are entering March, an incredible month of both celebration of women's leadership and yet a very serious moment where we have to really think about how to accelerate the change. If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we know, I think many of us have recognized that we are facing major setbacks, not just because of COVID, although that definitely did disrupt the progress that we had anticipated, but also because a lot of our partners and colleagues are not honoring the promise of the value of women and girls. And so we are gathered here today, one, to celebrate, but also to hold one another accountable. I am so honored to be sitting on this stage with Henrietta Fore, who has blazed an incredible trail, one that has inspired me, inspired many in my generation, and inspired definitely every woman on this panel, but one that is a legacy of opportunity and hope. And so today I wanted to have a conversation about what is possible, how we make real the promises that were made, and then how we move forward. What are the next opportunities? What are the markers of progress? Before we launch into our conversation, though, I just wanted to lay down some facts. Women hold 70% of health worker positions globally. 90% are nurses. So women are out there. We are leading. We are holding up entire systems. Women lead the delivery of health to 5 billion people and contribute an estimated $3 trillion US annually to global health, half in the form of unpaid work. Yet, women only hold 25% of leadership roles in health. How can we lead if we're not in positions of leadership? Women founders tend to build businesses that generate more revenues, create higher job growth, dream bigger, and execute better. We know that, the data is in. And sadly, as we look at the opportunity to invest in women leadership, there still are major missteps and underinvestment by race. Black founders, for example, in the US received only 0.48% of all venture dollars. How do we make that right? How do we self-correct? To that end, big questions, big statistics. For those of you who've been in this room, we witnessed a trailer of women leaders who are leading last mile solutions. So those were just 3 of the hundreds of thousands of examples in the world. Can you talk about what the state of women entrepreneurship is for women right now, Henrietta? What is your point of view?
Lola, I was afraid you were going to ask me to solve the problems you put out for us. Well, the state of entrepreneurship is actually pretty good. When I was coming out of college, this is the 1970s, we were just learning the word entrepreneurship, and we were so excited. Whoever did that, whatever they were doing, we wanted to be that. So Hala knows this example. I was a tennis player. My partner and I decided that we would follow a great concept for an entrepreneurial business, that of tennis greeting cards. We knew this would be a smashing success because greeting cards had high margins, and clearly every tennis player needed to have tennis greeting cards. We worked our little selves to death, selling our cards all over the city. This is in Denver. And then we realized that we actually weren't making any money from our little cards. So as entrepreneurs, you learn something from your failures. There is a reason, even though we thought this was a big market opportunity, no one else was in the market with tennis greeting cards, but there was a reason why no one else was in the market for tennis greeting cards. And so at that time, it was very hard to get loans. The next decade saw that we all began structuring. We began to put organization behind our entrepreneurial businesses. The next decade meant that we started doing financing in all kinds of interesting ways. Venture capital came in, the IFC came in public way. and helped out on public and private entities, we really began to move. And by the thousands, the 2000s, we really, I think, are doing well. There is more money, there are more skills, there are more people who are entrepreneurs. It is now very commonplace. I mean, in this room, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, but if you're just sort of out on the street, people are dreaming up businesses. I mean, yesterday I met 4 or 5 people on the Columbia campus who came up to me and just said, I want to start a business. Here's what it would look like. So I think there's a lot of yearning, there's a lot of desire, there's a lot of passion, and there are a lot more places where you can get training. So I think we're doing well. But we have not made the inroads. And so one of the things that Lola and I talked about was, I said, you know, Lola, what surprises me is we're the majority as women. So why haven't we done better? I mean, we should be able to. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think sometimes we don't have the confidence to act as a majority and to try to lead. And we lead with all of our male friends who are here with us today. But we lead with them, but we have got to come up with much better plans. But entrepreneurship is alive and well.
Well, hope. And what you're alluding to is the fact that there is abundance. We've seen more money made in the last 10 years than we've seen in a while. So the finances are there. You've also alluded to the fact of unlocking the power of public sector or other agencies, and you've led some of the key humanitarian aid agencies globally with USAID and UNICEF. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to unlock resources and investment at such global institutions? What kind of cultural shifts had to be made to really start to target and center women and girls in their funding?
So that's an interesting word, cultural shifts. But there are cultural shifts that need to be made in organizations, both public and private. I think one of the enormous opportunities we have right now is public and private finance. We're on the cusp of being able to join these two financial systems, but they're like rivers right now that are flowing by each other. We haven't learned how to link them up. But it's coming. It is coming strongly, and we have to get onto that. I mean, just very clearly, all the institutions. I think sometimes people don't focus on the end point in government because you get so involved with the processes and bogged down by the processes that after a while it just becomes tedious and you're trapped there. But if you can set a vision for where you want to go, you can get the resources behind it and you can accomplish it. So I think it's very doable. I might give you some examples. All right. So many of you know that I love public and private partnerships. So let me give you 2 examples that I've seen. One is from Lebanon, which Hala will enjoy, and it's Girls Got IT, or Girls Got It. And there are about 2,000 girls who gather at these events, and they are there to visit into rooms with older women who are in various careers. So you go into a room where the room are doctors or nurses. Another is an architect. Another one is an engineer for infrastructure. And they become mentees of the women in that room. And they take internships with those women. It is an exceptional way to get entrepreneurship moving because they see it, they see what you actually do, you have a mentor there with you, you'll get funding or a job from the company that they work for. So the public-private pieces really bring forth the best. There's another one that Lauren knows well, Generation Unlimited, that we started for young people between the ages of 10 and 24. And it was that they could learn beyond the foundational skills of reading and writing, but they could learn digital skills, they could learn entrepreneurial skills, they could use the soft skills that they will need in business and to be entrepreneurs. And they will have to do it sometimes outside the national curriculum, and they'll have to do it on their iPhones, some of them with just a 2 level rather than a 3 or 4 or 5, but they can do it. And if we can focus on those young people and public-private partnerships to get them jobs and to open up opportunities, I think that will be remarkable. There's another example that is completely private, and since Brian is here from the venture capital impact world, this one is credit for immigrants. And so, as you know, if you are an immigrant or if you're even coming to school in a place like Washington, you don't carry your credit with you. You need to have a credit rating. And this company, one of the founders is a woman, said, well, we want people to be able to carry their credit with them when they come into a location. It's enormously powerful for a woman who wants to be an entrepreneur. If you can get credit, you can begin to start your business, whatever your business is. And let me give you one other example that's totally public. So when HIV/AIDS first hit, we had the antiretrovirals, and we were really doing, we thought, extremely well in trying to stop HIV/AIDS. What we hadn't figured out is how to stop mother-to-child transmission. But we were able to with public funding, and we can now stop mother-to-child transmission. The Gates Foundation was very strongly helpful in this. But that is a public sector answer to the problem of entrepreneurship. If all of those young women and others are going to be healthy, it is because of that funding. So, I mean, there are lots of ways to fund, but entrepreneurs can't live without skills, and they can't live without funding. You need both.
So the challenge is being put forth to us today for all of us to make these investments. But I have another question for you about replication and scale. So in the global health and development space, there is a lot of pressure on entrepreneurs, governments to replicate and scale their programming and their innovations. Can you talk a little bit about what's holding back replication and scale beyond the investment dollars? What are the other sort of holistic supports women entrepreneurs need to scale their strategies and visions?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are lots of things you can do. When you look in places like Bangladesh and in some of the rural communities, women get together and they start talking about the things they can get done. And they can get everything done. I mean, they can, everything. One of my favorites was women in India decided that they needed a faster way to make their cheese, so they began making it in their washing machines. I mean, women are just enormously creative with whatever is around them. So some people need a group, and the group gives them the power and the confidence, and sometimes the bright idea that comes from your woman friend who said, why don't you try this? But other people, they need to do some research, they need to get their numbers right, they need to get their business plan right, and that sometimes means that you just need to sit there in front of your computer and think, and understand your market, your customer, what your supply chain is, what your pricing should be, all the things you learn that you need to learn as an entrepreneur. So I think people learn in different ways, and we shouldn't be too set that there's only one way to learn and there's only one answer. There are many answers, and it differs by culture. You know, sometimes you're in a culture that's very entrepreneurial, and other times you're in a culture that's very shy and reticent. And so you want to adapt yourself to those. At least when you're working internationally, it's so important to connect with the culture and to make sure that your products and services work in those cultures.
Thank you. Another question connected. I think many women in my generation and partners are experiencing a sense of burnout, that they've been in the fight, they've been in the movement for so long, and yet there's so much more work to do. And I was sitting and preparing for this panel with my panelists and colleagues, and there was just so much laughter and joy in the group. How do we maintain that spirit of laughter and joy? And what resonates with me with your previous comment about having community. That's definitely one way. But how else are you helping to sort of feed the sense of joy? I mean, it's no easy feat.
No, but you can't give up. I mean, you can't. We have so much to do, and the world needs to be better. And I think the world will be better, especially with more women leading. But it's, we really need to get out there. I think your girlfriends help a lot, but your male friends do too. It's just friends help you. They pick you up when you're down, and you help them when they're down. So, stay strong, everyone.
You helpfully noted when we were preparing for this conversation that we all need a clear call to action. And I'll make my call to action, but I also would love to hear what your call to action is. And then I know our panelists will have as well. The bottom line is that we need to get together. We need to align. We all are ambitious with our vision and goals, and it's about connectivity. So for our Global Innovators Group, my call is that our colleagues and peers and allies invest this month in a woman leader. That investment can be in dollars, that can be in support, that can be in bringing joy and respite and care. I have a second call. We have a group of innovators. Over 50% of our community are women leaders and entrepreneurs. One of the frustrations I have in the moment is many investors and philanthropists are asking the question, where are these leaders? Or when they find those leaders, they say, ooh, it's a little risky, or the idea isn't big and bold enough, or we're not sure how to get these investments directly to them because of things like credit, or there's a long list. But we can open that door. I was talking to Hala, we call it de-risking. We can lend our privilege and our networks to ensure that those resources are directed appropriately, and then those holistic supports are offered around amplification and respite. So that is my call. Look to Aspen, look to the Global Innovators Group. If you are curious about where to direct your investments, we will connect you to our incredible network of powerful leaders and more. So I'm just really honored to be sitting here with you, to be learning from you. And to that, I'll turn to you for one more opportunity to learn from you. What is your call for us today?
Well, Lola, I want you to just keep carrying the flag strongly and without hesitation, because entrepreneurship is not easy. I mean, all of you have been through this. It's not easy, but you have to carry forward your ideas. And if your first idea, like tennis greeting cards, does not work, you move to idea number 2, idea number 20, idea number 200. And if you are sitting next to somebody who's got a great idea, help her, help him, and it will come to pass. Lola, I would ask 2 things, though, if we're going to do a call to action. So one is, we really need the world to move in a couple of areas. So let me just tick some off. I think it's clear that we need more work on mental health. Just no question about it. Everybody's been through it. The young people today need it even more. So anybody who's got a company in mental health, please scale it up, start working on it. I think another area that we really need to work on is the circular economy. Europe is way ahead of us, and we in America are way behind. I live on a ranch. We have avocados and lemons. The avocados that we have, we throw away the seeds and we throw away the skins. But those seeds are great protein. There is a little company in Africa that is using them to create something like a pompey nut. We shouldn't be throwing it away in America, but we do. And lemon, I mean, we throw away the skins all the time. There's a company in Sicily that takes those lemon rinds and they make it into thread that Missoni and others are using in fashion. So why not the circular economy? So anybody who can work in the circular economy, I think it's going to be very strong, very important. And then there are 2 other areas that we did at UNICEF that I think are just terribly important as a world. We have to connect every school in the world to the internet. Girls and boys are just going to be in a secondary position if they don't know the internet. We can do it with little Wi-Fi receivers on the top of schoolhouses, lower satellites, which are now ubiquitous. It's an American technology that has space in it. So we could connect every school with the internet, and why don't we just do it? We could do it in the next 2 to 3 years. It would not be that much. We need to do it in America too. We don't have it in America. And then the other one is water. Young people today adore the climate area. We all know about it. We need it for health. We saw it during COVID. 40% of the hospitals and clinics in sub-Saharan Africa do not have water to wash your hands if you were a doctor between surgeries. I mean, it's just, we should have water. We need water to drink. We need water for agriculture. Anything you can do about cleaner, more abundant water is going to be a big issue, I think, coming up. So if any of you can find solutions to them, let's get on with it. Let's get moving on it. And those of us who are carrying funds, let's try to fund and try to help those of you who are working on it. And then the other one is, in the Aspen Network and in MIT Solve, both of you have an exceptional richness of talent, of people who could mentor. So if we could set up a system of where there are maybe 3 to 4 companies in a city or a town that you could mentor, let's do it. Let's assign people to it. We could help these companies, and we can help them scale, to your point, Lola. But you have just a great richness that you should share with the world.
Well, asked and answered. Thank you, again, for sharing your wisdom, your time, your energy, and your just brilliance with this community. I know we're staying connected. I know you asked us, what's our plan together? So we're, as I tell all my colleagues, we're here for good trouble, although I don't think any of this is trouble. This is just what we have to do. So if you're here for good trouble, join us. But thank you so much, Henrietta, for spending your time with us today.
My pleasure, Lola.
Thank you. Who's next? Yasmin Madan, who leads the Co-Impact group. She'll tell us more about that and the commitment to gender equity. And Ivana Ali, an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much. What a tough act to follow. It's so wonderful to be here. It's so nice to be with you all. Thank you, Lola, for setting us up. Thank you, Henrietta, for all your wisdom. I'm Hala Hanna. I'm Executive Director of MIT Solve. We are a platform for finding and scaling the most amazing tech solutions to our pressing global challenges. We are very privileged to have Henrietta as one of our advisors. And you're 60%, I'm not one-upping you, Lola, 60% of our teams are women-led. And we think about these things day in, day out. And so I'm excited about the good trouble we're going to talk about today. And you saw in the trailers, if you were here before, 3 of our women catalysts that we work with. And I can tell you a little bit more about them in a little bit. Now, we have a very ambitious agenda in the next 40 minutes of covering all of global health, entrepreneurship. So we're gonna jump right in. And in terms of instead of an introduction, I would love if we can go around and share what brought us to this work, what this work means to us, and how is it that it's manifesting today at the nexus of health and entrepreneurship. And Ivana, I would love to start with you.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So for the parents in the room, just imagine your child coming home from school and just completely falling apart, saying, "Mommy, why am I not beautiful? Why does my hair not look like my classmates?" And this was my reality. So my 6-year-old child, her name is Zoe. That started to happen, right? And so as a mom, first time mom, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, no, baby, you're beautiful. Don't say that about yourself. And she's like, no, mommy, why is everyone always touching my hair and saying, mean things or asking me? And it's like, what's going on? And she clearly was in a predominantly white classroom. And so for me as a mom, I was heartbroken, trying to figure out what to do, how to help her. I counseled, I met with my village, of course, talked to my sisters, like, what can I do? And like, keep encouraging her, and so that's what I kept doing. My sister then suggested get her a black doll. And so I actually hadn't paid attention to, the kinds of toys she was playing with, because just for context, I grew up in a all black society. So I grew up in Nigeria. And so very different experience, right? And so for me, it was everyone looked the same, right? And so for Zoe, completely different reality. And so this was kind of a come to, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I didn't think about it. And so the other thing she pointed out was, mommy, you're not wearing your own hair. And at the time, I was very much in tune with the Eurocentric standards of beauty because I was in corporate America and I felt the need to fit in. It's all in our head, but obviously media and different things kind of perpetuate that, whole thing. I see someone nodding over there. Yup, exactly. And so, couple of things happened. So I decided, I needed to be the change that I wanted to see, and I set the example for my daughter. I started to wear my own hair. I won't tell you it was easy, but it was like, okay, I have to do this. And, getting her that black doll, I started to see the changes in her. Like, she's like, oh my goodness, she looks like me. But she did point out one thing. She said, why is her hair straight? I'm like, this is what I found in the store, but she does have skin like yours. And she's like, no, mommy, I want to make a doll with curly hair. I want to make a doll with braids, like, how I wear my hair. And, she got me thinking. And so I said, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And Zoe was very persistent, 6 years old, but she just said, mommy, when are we going to make my doll? When are we going to make my doll? So I'm like, I guess she's serious. So what started off as a project, I took a little bit of money and I'm like, all right, we got a designer, went through the whole, shebang with her. We made a pact and I said, Zoe, if we're going to do this, we have to be partners in this. Like, you're not going to just I'm over here, I'm a marketing executive, I don't know anything about toys. But, she was very, very much committed and passionate about this idea of wanting to make a doll that looked like her and really represented her and her friends, right? And so, our children are very brilliant is what, I know you all know, right? And so sometimes it just takes someone listening to them and believing in them and just helping them take things to the next level. And so, we set out on our journey and we did a bunch of research, we made a bunch of mistakes, but here we are today. Beautiful Curly Me was born and is a brand on a mission to instill and inspire confidence. We have a focus on young Black and brown girls, but it's really girls, right? Because we know girls' confidence suffers a lot. From research we did, and reports continue to come out how girls' confidence drops by the time they reach the age of 8, drops by 30%, and keeps plummeting. Like by the time they get to that 5th, 6th grade, middle school, oh my goodness, it's in shambles, right? And it's because of all the external forces and all the things, the social media pressures and all of those things. So for us, it's about, how do we start early to instill that sense of self-love and pride in our girls? How do we arm them with the tools to navigate life and be confident and to show up every day as their best, most authentic, unique selves? And we're doing that through play with the dolls. Zoe's also an author. She's written some books. They're all about affirming and, just empowering girls. We have puzzles and we have a girls community. So it's about bringing girls together to learn from each other and to really build those leadership skills in them early so that they can thrive. So all that to say, this is where we are. This is the work we're doing, and it really was started by my daughter, her passion, and her overcoming those challenges of self-esteem. But it's growing into this movement, and we're super excited about where we are and where we're headed. We're social impact, so for every doll that's purchased, we do give one away to a young girl in need because we want girls to just take that as a touch point, right, to really start to foster that sense of self-love and confidence.
How fun is that? And I love that it's multifaceted and you're addressing the problem with so many different directions. Lauren, how about we go to you and then we'll finish with Yasmin.
Such a tough act to follow. Both you and Zoe and Bella on the ground.
Bella on the ground.
Thank you, Hala. Well, I also grew up in Africa, in a violent country, South Africa, during the 90s, with a younger sister who really looked up to me to set an example and be a mentor for her. And that propelled me into care work. It was also throughout my career, I have been lucky enough to benefit from somebody saying to me every now and again, whether a friend or a person at work, how are you doing? How can I help? How can I help the work that you're doing? And I started looking around and traveling across and working across Africa and Asia, noticing how the red thread behind every human rights violation involved a girl at some level, without somebody to ask that question, without somebody to be there for her. And a lot like you're talking about, listening and trying to respond is what I've made my job and whole career really about. How can we listen to girls and make the world more responsive to them? The case for investment is so enormous. Girls' lives are steeped in violence. A third of them are experiencing violence by a partner. Before she even reaches 18. So that violence starts early, starts young, and is pervasive. 1 in 5 are brides before their 18th birthday. A third suffer from anemia, meaning they're malnutrition. They're simply not getting the right food because the right decisions about who gets to eat and what they get to eat don't involve girls at the center. We know that the top killer of women is cervical cancer. And yet a fraction of girls, less than 10%, has access to this very life-saving and easy to procure and distribute vaccine. Those are just some of the numbers that make the case for investment so overwhelming. And yet, perhaps as investors and partners, you can help me answer, the investment is woeful. Less than 6% of any kind of overseas development assistance goes to girls, and adolescent girls in particular. And even when that money goes to them, someone tries to take it away. Make it about something else. Education money for girls becomes some kind of training for adults. Vocational learning innovation centers are overly populated by boys and men, especially from elites. How can we really target girls? That has become my calling. And what inspires me to do this work? Well, we just finished a wonderful survey with young people, girls and boys, over 500,000 from nearly 50 countries in the world, just about to be published next week for International Women's Day. Keep a close watch. And we said to them, if you had $1 billion, what would you spend it on? Talking about listening. And you know, their answers were very similar between girls and boys, and very easy to group. They were, we would like our parents to understand the importance of supporting girls' rights. Boys said this too. 2, we want education about our bodies at schools. We just want to know what's going on and how we navigate that. Something that's prohibited, even in some states in the US, something that should be really basic, education and learning about what's happening to your body as you mature. 3rd, we would like to be safe from violence. We just want to be able to walk the streets without having to worry about harassment, abuse, and exploitation. 4thly, education, the most transformative investment. We would like to be able to access it, we want it to be good, and we want it to be relevant to the world of work. And then finally, we just want to be able to be healthy. We want to be able to walk into any health center, facility, or care and get the kinds of treatment that we need. So thank you. That's what gives me a lot of optimism.
Thank you for sharing those results. And guess who has $1 billion? Almost.
Is my mic working? Well, this is quite it's a little distracting when you're so fascinated by your panelists that you forget what your story is. But I'll try. I grew up in India. I'm the only girl in my dad's side of the family. So the rules were different for me than my brothers and my cousins. Then I figured out I'm left-handed, and things didn't work. They worked, I couldn't even cut with a pair of scissors. And then I realized that it's about the systems. And we put a lot of focus on change on the individual. And individuals are very, very powerful, but the problem is the systems. And I did a lot of work. I worked in Zimbabwe and Vietnam and Cambodia and all sorts of health areas, from cervical cancer to HIV to water and sanitation. And I realized that actually, to Henrietta's point, when we try and solve it by ourselves, to your point about scale, we won't get very far. But when we come together and we look at what can be activated in systems and changing those systems and the resources that are behind it, that actual change, irreversible change can happen in society. That's what I've realized. And going through my career, I found Co-Impact, which is where I work now. It's a global collaborative. We bring together funding partners and what we call program partners. We don't call them grantees. The fact that you get a grant should not be your identity. We're in partnership with them on programming. And we try coming in partnership as equals to solve problems at the scale of the problems, whether they are in health, education, or in livelihoods. But how do we do that? And then when you analyze any single problem, the outcomes are worse for women and girls than they are for men and boys. So if we believe in equality, you have to set the gradient to equity. Otherwise, we're not going to get there. And so when it says, when everything is equal, well, it's not. It just doesn't work like that. So I think when we say we're investing in women and girls, I actually think we're investing in a better world. We're just correcting for things that need to be corrected. And that's what we're trying to do at Co-Impact with the Gender Fund, where our ambition is to raise and deploy $1 billion towards gender equality. But I can tell you that the day we do have those $1 billion and we deploy them, we will still not have moved the needle on gender equality unless the gravitational pull in systems, particularly public systems and market systems, moves towards equity.
It's interesting how there's like a certain inevitability in our paths. Like there's nothing else we can be doing. Our work is to shed a light on underserved entrepreneurs. And as a woman, as an Arab, I definitely know what it feels like to be underserved or overlooked. What I like is that we have these different levels here of vantage points. We have the innovators who are working on the ground, and then we have the institutions, and then we have the system view of it. And Solve probably stands somewhere in the middle, whereby our job is really to connect people like you, Ivana, to the institutions and to the capital. So maybe you alluded to this already, and Lola, you as well, and Henrietta. Without scale, we can't really change systems. So how about we just jump in? Let's look at those, the twin topics of scale and innovation, and we'll do something that we love to do in DC, which is to define things, but not in a tedious way. And like how does it actually show up in your in your work? How does it manifest itself? And maybe we start with you, Yasmin.
So happy to. And I think historically, at least in the work I've done in development, scale has been understood as numbers. So if somebody comes to you and says, I do 100,000, you say, okay, then double it. Or let's do 10x, right? You should do but nobody starts with what's the scale of the problem? What's the denominator? What is the point of me saying I reach 500,000 farmers when actually there's 8 million of them in East Africa and over 60% of them are women, and most of them are subsistence farmers who can barely make a living out of it. So we have to start scale with what is the denominator. The second, I think, is what's the texture of that? Who is it not working for has to be defined, because it's very easy to get to the first few miles. But it's the last mile that's a problem. But tell me when fixing for the last mile has actually worked not for the first few. So why don't we start fixing there? So to me, unless we define scale to the scale of the problem, and we define the texture of that, whether that is intersectionality, whether that is any of these factors, we can't really speak of it. And finally, scale for whom? Right? Back to the point, I think we all want to solve, but are we solving in a way that is compensating? So if I take the example of India, if the education system is letting a girl down, should I try and solve in a few schools that I can reach in a state I picked? Or should I be solving for the entire public education system in India not working? So the scale has to be defined in what infrastructure already exists. No philanthropy can match what the public education spending in India is today. Just in 2 states, there are over 30,000 schools and over 150,000 teachers and millions of students going in. So why solve where we can work and compensate for it? And why not actually solve for activating systems because these systems are letting people down. And so that's for us what scale really means.
That is so interesting. That is interesting because I guess I was just sitting here listening. I love that, but what if you can't get to that level? How about starting where you can start? Like, what's your perspective on that? Sorry, no, I'm totally taking over.
I think we should start where we can, but what is the ambition? Right? We heard Henrietta earlier say, what's the end game for the government? And I think we start with what we can do, but to stop and ask what needs to be done.
Right.
And in that point, it doesn't mean we have to solve it. Back to, I think we should be working in coalition, in partnerships, in collaboration, in community. It's the only way to solve. But we shouldn't start with what can I do. I think we should ask what needs to be
What
done.
needs to be done? I love that.
I was hoping for more of a debate.
Come on. Hold on. No, I'm just kidding. You want to go ahead? But I guess I can go next. So I really love that you said that because I think we think about that a lot. Beautiful Curly Me. We're all about how can we partner? How can we collaborate? I love what you said, Henrietta, about the public and the private, and just those examples you gave are very powerful because we're thinking a lot about that as we do this work. But yeah, for us, scale is you think about 65% of the world has curly hair, right? So you got a quarter of that, so we have those numbers, right? Where we're like, okay, this is the potential like market. And then we think about the impact pieces of it, right? Like, so who really needs what we're serving? And so when we think about that, we think about it from a few different lenses. So we're looking at on the product side, right? The younger, the younger children, how can our big goal right now is, we want to impact 10 million girls over the next 4 years by 2030. Is that 4 years or 6 years? I'm like losing. Is that 7 years? Oh, wait a minute. We need to increase that. But 10 million girls over the next 5 years is really what the goal is. And so how do we do that? So it's a combination of, scaling our products. So since we're a product-based business right now, how do we get into mass retail on a global level, right? There are 100 million Afro-Colombian households in Latin America. There's again, kind of to back up, our products are not just for Black children. I think every child should have a Black doll because, it teaches you empathy. It's reflective of the world around you. And, where our goal is to expand into other different kinds of dolls, different skin tones, et cetera, to really represent the children, of the world. And so you think about products from a scale perspective. We also think about the impact work we're doing. So when you think about, how many girls are we actually touching through our programming? So how do we really expand this girl community to be a global one? We already have members in Kenya. We have a couple of members, in Nigeria and a few places, but it's like, how do we continue to grow those numbers so they can actually start to meet on the ground in those different countries? Like, that's what we think about. And how can we partner? We don't want to be the ones to do it all. Like, we can partner with local organizations that can host those, local programming events on the ground in those countries. So we think about that. We need money to do all that, right? So we think about, the community piece. We think about the products. We think about content. Zoe she's working on a pilot for a show that can, touch a lot of girls all over the world, because once that show's in production, we're teaching girls problem solving through our characters and, having that entrepreneurial mindset. And, those are skills that will serve girls like all over the world, will serve them well. So we think about it from those three angles. And then we also have our Youth Mean Business Accelerator, which is about really developing the next rising generation of young leaders and entrepreneurs. And so we had our first accelerator last year, and we're continuing to scale that program. So how do we continue to fund young people to give them economic mobility so they too can create jobs and they too can create impact in their own ways? So so all of that to say is like, we think about scale. I love what you said though, because we have to obviously define the bigger problem. But I think for us, it's like, how do we find those partners and attack it from our own vantage point, if you will.
Lauren, you have amazing reach at UNICEF, so I guess scaling for you is very easy, right?
Well, scale is in the eye of the beholder, and what you both have in common is an encouragement to be bold, right? To not stop dreaming for things. I think for me, scale is, and I think about this a lot, because we're also a human rights organization, and scale can just be one. is two things. One is to base our learning and our work in the lived realities of girls and women. And the second is to think of disruption as work at scale. So I'll give you some concrete examples. And the first one is a mistake that I've made. When I was working in Indonesia, of course, passionate about adolescent girls, I was heading up a program to look at how could we get information to girls about menstrual health and hygiene. In a very religious society where even talking about menstrual health was taboo and stigmatized, how could we get that information directly into girls' hands? And so, because 90% of the population is online in this vastly populated country, it seemed obvious that we would go digital. So it was a few years ago. Apps were still a relatively new concept. I thought we were very cool to partner with the private sector, Microsoft and others, and come up with an app that would give girls this information. We got the private sector financing. We got some information on how to make an app easy and accessible, beautifully glossy. I thought it was wonderful. My team and I were very proud. And we took it to girls and they said, "This is terrible. We will never use this app. The flashy colors and the images just draw attention to what is a prohibited topic in my house. Phones in my house are controlled by my father and brother. So you have to make the content something that they can read and feel okay about me learning. And the graphics have to be low enough bandwidth that I can access it on my way to school or at school or on my friend's phone." So we scrapped the whole thing, got girls to be on the advisory kind of group for the design. I'm sure you know all about this, and came up with something vastly different that's now available on Google Play and up and running for millions of girls and boys in 12 countries. So that's an exercise in scale that has to be with girls front and center. The second is disruption, which I've seen in almost every country that I work, women and girls on the front line of this, particularly when it comes to health rights. I was recently in Peru, where there was a case that became quite politicized and was all over the media about a young girl who'd unfortunately been raped by her uncle, become pregnant, but was not allowed to access care services for her own health or for her baby. And she was also not allowed to go to school any longer. And women and girls groups, particularly young women's groups, took up the case and really involved everyone they possibly could. The UN, the special rapporteur, government partners and allies, the private sector, and the public, most importantly. The legislation now in Peru and several surrounding countries about access to sexual and reproductive health and rights has changed as a result. I saw a similar thing, and this one really gives me goosebumps, in Sierra Leone, where just during COVID and for many years before, girls who were pregnant or adolescent mothers were prohibited from attending school. The education authorities were worried about the example that would set. But girls weren't satisfied with that. They were agitated, they were angry, and they were frustrated. And they talked to each other and to some adults and said, "What do we do?" And they were connected to lawyers and also, of course, some aid groups. UNICEF provided some behind-the-scenes support. And they took their case to ECOWAS, which is a regional body in West Africa, which found that indeed it was unconstitutional to have that kind of legislation in schools. That legislation has now been rescinded. Adolescent mothers can go back to school and also access childcare at schools, which I think is amazing. It's had such a knock-on effect that it's inspired your country, Nigeria, and many others to do the same. So for me, scale starts with the dream to be big, but also the agitation and feeling in young people to make a world that is more commensurate with the dreams that they have.
That's wonderful. It's really like scaling it down to the one, to the Zoe, and then blowing it back up to the millions. And I really appreciate the policy angle and the tech angle. One of my favorite definitions for innovation is it's solving real problems for real people. And this is you'd really brought it home with all of these examples. Thank you. And when Kitty is one of the women catalysts that we were seeing in the trailer, and I think for me her story brings very close to home how scale, especially in the health cannot happen without the institutions behind it. So for Kitty, she's a chirogenist, so she's a scientist of cold, and she figured out a way that she created this backpack that you can put on your bag so that vaccines stay cold for the duration of for a couple of days instead of a couple of hours. And we know that there are people and children who are dying in those villages, for the vaccines that you and I can just go down the street and get at CVS. And she was about to quit. She was at it for so many years, and she was stuck in this quagmire whereby she couldn't develop more of those backpacks because she didn't have the capital. So she couldn't take orders, and then investors were like, "Where are your orders so that we give you money?" And finally, she was selected as a solver for one of our health challenges, and she met through one of our events, UPS Foundation, actually, not. And they funded a trial for her, so she was able to prove her point. And then through that, now the 2-unit, backpack became a 3,000-unit order from the government of Cameroon that is going to be funded by an international institution. So it's like all of these different, actors really coming together if we're going to reach those numbers. And I would love, I don't know, what does that bring up to you?
I think we have to ask who is going to pay at some point, right? Who's going to do and who's going to pay? And if you can ask that question today and you can say, okay, today I'm going to do and philanthropy or, private sector is going to pay, you ask 5 years from now, who's going to do that? And I think with health, there is a moral obligation for governments to pay. I can't imagine today putting the onus of the military budget on individuals. Can you imagine if you were asked there'll be a certain deduction from your employee because of the military budget, it's in defense, we need to do it? No, the governments pay. That is the same way we should treat health if we truly believe in universal health coverage. So for me, ultimate scale, we saw that during COVID, even in the US, that yes, private sector stepped up, but it was the government's paying that is needed. So I do think, again, the end game has to be defined, and that shouldn't preclude innovation from happening, but the scaling of that has to ultimately be through public financing.
And what do you think of the thought that philanthropy is the best risk capital available out there? Is that how, working with all of the actors that you work with, is that how you see it?
So yes, but I do want to just take a moment on this point of risk, because we tend to follow a private sector definition of risk, which is I'll put money and I might lose it. But when we are talking about social problems and we are talking about developmental ambitions, can we please take a moment and talk about the risk of not doing? Can we talk about the risk of not investing in women and girls? Half the talent of this world is going unharnessed because we are not investing in women and girls. Can we talk about the risk of not investing in health and in prevention? And we saw the fault lines of COVID. So can we please take back that concept from private sector of risk for a moment and just talk about the risk of inaction or the risk of waiting or the risk of playing it safe? No. The risk is in not doing enough. But yes, there is a role for philanthropic capital, absolutely, to come in and allow for innovation, allow for new ideas, and then ultimately de-risk these in a way for governments to take on. And we are seeing amazing examples of that, absolutely. But I think it is working in partnership and working towards an end goal again. We will build and they'll come doesn't always work. You have to build and vision together, and then we will all come together in I think, service of that vision.
I think Lola alluded to this earlier, or actually spoke to it earlier. It's interesting you say that, but then I think my lived experience as an entrepreneur, especially as a Black woman, is very different, right? And so you mentioned the stat earlier about less than 0.5% of capital dollars, venture capital, goes to Black women, and then you think about just women in general. I think it's about 2%, like female only led firms, and then 1% for Black entrepreneurs. So it's miserable, right? And so obviously that's just one form of capital. But then you think about the banks make it so difficult. There's just, it's like it's a never ending list of things that you need to provide. And I know it always sounds, go out, get the money. No, it's not that simple. And so you're always constantly having to prove yourself. And so for us, like, I'll just speak to Beautiful Curly Me, like we've taken the really hard route of just self-funding from beginning. Like, it's all my savings and um, and product. If you know anything about product-based companies, it's very capital intensive. You're creating a doll mold from scratch. There's a lot of money involved in that, and the supply chain and shipping and all the things. And so we've been doing it the old-fashioned, the harder way. But I know there is an easier way, and I think if to your point, Yasmin, about people just seeing what is it that you're solving, and what is the risk of not investing in women, especially women. We're multipliers. You put money in a woman's hand, like, she will figure it out and she will feed a whole nation, right? And so I think I don't know what needs to change for people to take women, especially Black women, seriously when it comes to entrepreneurship. I mean, you have numbers, you're showing like we've been growing like steadily. We 10x like after the first couple of years. And so it's like, but you're always having to prove yourself, I feel like. And so I think for us, it's just, the opportunity to get grant funding, unrestricted grant funding, especially to do the social impact work we're doing, because we are paying it forward with our girl programming and the social impact work. How can we partner with more companies and both corporate as well as just organizations, institutions that want to do things at scale, like, maybe want to adopt 3 states and all the kids in the school get, journals and workshops and because we do focus on literacy, we do social emotional, and these are all like very important, like, kind of priority areas for a lot of institutions right now. So how do people start to take Black women seriously, specifically? I'm gonna speak from my own lived experience, and like, don't, just because you don't understand what we're solving doesn't negate like the importance of what it is. So I think that has been our experience. It's been, sorry, I didn't mean to like go on a rant there, but it's very challenging when you're working so hard to build a business and you just, the money is not forthcoming, and you're having to do everything yourself. So it's very frustrating. But I know there's always a path forward, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
I'm so glad, Yasmin, that you brought up money and that you talked about it too. I think we've got to put these things directly and explicitly on the table. If we're going to have a transformative world that is more equal, where girls and women are more powerful, and where we solve these problems that are all too largely accepted and normalized, we're going to need millions of kitties and people who believe in kitties, who start ramp funding for girl leaders early on, and support explicitly women leaders later. And so, I think what your story brought up for me was behind Kitty must have gone a lot of investment, belief, and courage. And that's why I always, like Henrietta, believe in we've got to have that core financing. It must be a given in every country in the world for girls' education and skills. Secondary school completion should be a thing of the dark ages, and yet it is a reality for far too many, right? We still know that boys are completing education, skills, and training twice at the speed of girls. Things are still holding girls back. They are getting really like weighed down by care responsibilities, a lack of belief in their potential, and yet they are these economic powerhouses. Transforming their lives transforms economies. So just, a couple of the data points we know, for example, less than $2 a day on a girl to help her finish education yields a 10% GDP increase for countries. Why are we not doubling down on those investments? It's so incredible. We need those philanthropists, those investors to have that long-sighted vision that governments may not have the patience or political term for. And we have to get behind every kitty, every one of you and your daughter Zoe with the right questions. What is it that you need? linking her up to the right kinds of peer support models, the mentors that are doing that work already in the future, as Henrietta talked about from Lebanon. Solutions like yours, hubs like yours, where there's a connection. That's the other story from Kitty, right? Is she was connected. She was connected to financing. She was connected to people who said, I think I know someone who can help you. And this room feels full of connections to me. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation that's going to happen next.
I like that you said that. So social capital and financial capital, social capital, very key. And the one thing I notice a lot of is there are a lot of programs out there, but they're always very much focused on educating and overly educating, and we're overeducated and underfunded. Like that's just the truth. Like there's always like more another course to take, another cohort to be part of, but there's no money at the end of it. At the end of the day, we need real money to solve real problems. So I love that you said that.
Can I come in and build on that? Because a lot of global funding also goes towards mostly international organizations that have a presence in the global north, mostly male-led. This is the reality today. And we said at Co-Impact about 2-3 years ago that 100% of our country level funding will go to Global South organizations, non-negotiably, and a majority, predominantly, it will go to women-led organizations. And it's happened. We dispersed over 160 million last year. 100% of our funding in the Global South is to Global South organizations, and our portfolio is right now 90% women-led. So the talent, the potential is all there. We just have to signal and invest and then clear. But I think it has to be backed by commitments and action. The problem is, and we do today think it's riskier. We hear words like, it is riskier to fund an organization that you look at last year's budget. But that's a great way to hold somebody back, because the last year's budget will be a reflection of the underfunding and the underinvestment that has historically been happening. So we have to redefine even how risk is measured. And we had to do that at Co-Impact to change our criteria for sourcing and for shortlisting based not just on last year's budget or absorption capacity or financial systems, but to say we're going to invest in all of this so that you will be in a stronger place.
This panel runs itself. It's great. Thank you so much. Do we have time for one more question before 5? Okay, let's just go to I want to make sure you get to demand a lot of things from the room. So March is this, month of celebration and really of just recommitting ourselves to that big vision, that bold goals that we have. You have a chance to ask something from this room. Maybe Ivana, we can start with you.
Don't get me started. I want it all. No. But I would say, honestly, invest in women, invest in Black women, and I think the numbers speak for themselves when we look at just, Black women entrepreneurs are the fastest growing entrepreneurs, but only 3% make it to the 5-year mark and beyond because lack of funding, right? And so a lot of brilliant ideas are going, to the wayside because there's just so many disparities that have sort of held us back from being able to achieve, that highest potential that we know we can achieve. And so I would say, encourage us to kind of echoing what some of my panelists said about, just redefining what risk looks like, really thinking about the long-term impact of the solutions and the problems that we're solving, and just place a good bet on us because we're good ground. So talk to me. I have a lot of great plans, and we have a lot of programs that we're working on that we definitely need the support on. So thank you.
It's a winning stock. Lauren?
Winning stock. Thank you.
So you can guess what mine are, but maybe I'll just put them a little differently. To build on Lola's ask of make this month about investing in women leaders, I encourage you to invest in a girl leader that you know in some way or another. Find a moment to talk to somebody about what they might need, what they might want, what their hopes and aspirations are. Maybe it's a niece, a daughter, somebody's friend. I think those conversations yield multiplier effects. They're an investment worth making. And then at scale, do ask the question, if you have any influence whatsoever, where is the money for girls? You'll be surprised at how missing it is. We know overwhelmingly to invest in girls is to transform a girl's life and to transform a country at large. It is a cost-effective multiplier effect in the kind of scale that we can only dream about. So if you have any influence over how money is going, to make that funding as explicit as possible. And I will share with you a last story. I was just in Afghanistan recently, a third visit in the course of a series of political changes you all know about. And the last visit was the most difficult of my career. But I did travel to a very mountainous, remote region where girls have for months now, years almost, been locked at home, unable to go to school, unable to access any kind of community activity, almost invisible from public life. And yet in one village, I met a girl, 15 years old, who had learned how to read before the ban came into effect. And she had encouraged her father to build a small mud hut for all girls and women in the village to take turns sharing a couple of textbooks that they still had available. She was teaching illiterate women in their 70s how to read for the first time in their lives. So that tiny investment of a couple of textbooks made a few years ago was reaping dividends for all kinds of generations. So I think thinking how far that dollar can go with that girls' optimism and potential in mind.
That's wonderful. Yasmin?
It's exactly what you both have said. I think invest in women and girls, but I do think somewhere we have to stop investing in them as beneficiaries and invest in them as agents of change, right? So let's stop figuring out solutions for them and let's invest in their solutions.
Mic drop. Thank you, thank you. I know there are amazing people in the room as well, so I do want to get a chance to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts, your hopes.
Hi there, my name is Susan Chapin, and this question is for Yasmin, although the others are welcome to answer. I'm currently leading a study for spring impact on payers at scale, and so when you bring up the risk capital, it just brings to mind the need for systems change on the funding side, because all of the entrepreneurs are speaking about restricted versus unrestricted capital. And we also have the notion of outcomes-based financing, results-based financing, and how do you get on that path and trajectory. With all those nods, I'm sure maybe I've sparked a thought, so please share.
The reality today is that the person who has the money thinks they have the answers and the power, right? And the person who has the money takes responsibility then for the outcomes. When funders say, I want to invest in outcomes, that's a really good thing to say. But what happens is then all the power is on their side of the table. And what we need is more of getting behind the vision of social change leaders and organizations. So yes, that change is needed. It's a systems change that's needed in philanthropy and I think in development at large. And we completely align with that. But I also think it is about what are we trying to achieve? Right? And this is why the end game matters very, very much. I keep coming back to Henrietta's point. I think if we try and say, I want to get something done over the next few years, and this is your starting point, then you are going to say things like, what can I scale? What can I control? What can I, take credit for? But if the end game is something bigger, and we're all pulling in that direction, then the conversation changes to what a role of a funder and a social change leader is. So we just have to set the horizon a little bit further out on this.
Thank you. Anyone else? I heard today that I should give it 5 seconds before I actually jump to something else. Here we go.
Hey, Hala. So my name is Isis. I'm with the Lex Mindy Pro Bono Foundation, and we do a lot of work supporting social entrepreneurs with legal support in order for them to be able to scale and grow. And we support all the MIT solvers who we love. And a lot of the conversation right now around funding, which is very important, is around funding the entrepreneurs themselves. But I am a little bit curious about what you see in the change around the actual ecosystem building and building that ecosystem in a way that allows these entrepreneurs to lean on the necessary skills from lawyers, from CPAs, from accountants, from the professional skills that they need in order to build those businesses, because they get the money, and if you go to a big law firm, you're spending that money in a hot second, right? So organizations like ours who are trying to give them those services on a pro bono or a very low bono rate so that they can use that money to actually build their business as opposed to, yeah.
Was that for you? Was that for her? Or was it for everybody? Okay. Actually, I'll chime in. There's a few. So back to the importance of community. So we've been fortunate to be plugged into a few startup ecosystems, mini ecosystems, if you will, in Atlanta, where we're based. So one, for example, is called Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs. They actually have office space there, and it's this whole idea of they're creating this huge space for Black entrepreneurs specifically, and they partner with large banks, law firms, et cetera, to provide services and resources for about 500 entrepreneurs that are sort of affiliated with this center, right? And so I'm thinking something along those lines where there's a few of those types of organizations that are set up for entrepreneurs. I know Goldman Sachs has a big program there. They've committed a lot of funding to women entrepreneurs specifically, and then there's a few others, Goody Nation, et cetera. But I would say I think there's a distinction you have to make between like the entrepreneurs, like I would say someone like me, for instance. I have an MBA. I have tons of work experience. I've worked in corporate America for a lot of large organizations, Fortune 500, et cetera. I don't have the same needs as someone that's just kind of coming off the street and like has no clue what a trademark is or whatnot. So I think a lot of times we're all sort of lumped up in the same category where it's like, oh, here's another program to join. It's like, no, I don't, like, I actually need money now. Like, I'm done, I'm good, but not to say that stuff's not important. I think it's absolutely very important. We've definitely benefited from pro bono services, especially during COVID when everyone was interested in funding, and supporting Black entrepreneurs. We got, IP, like we got a lot of things filed for free, which is amazing. But I think that work needs to continue. So I love what you're doing. I can definitely refer you to a few other organizations that are targeting minority or the new majority entrepreneurs. They're no inside joke. That are out there that are, looking for those types of partnerships and collaborations. I don't know if you all have heard about Fearless Fund. So they're a fund focused on Black women and VC firm, and they have a foundation arm. They're involved in a lawsuit right now because their grant funding has the courts have sort of put a pause on them funding because they're saying it's discriminatory because it's focused on Black women. And we actually were a recipient of a grant from them. So, I find that there's a lot of things happening that a lot of people might not know about, that, we're under a little bit of an attack, if you will. And Hello Alice is another grant platform that got sued as well for, I want to, fund minority-owned businesses, et cetera. So it's interesting how, these things are playing out. But yeah, there's definitely room for partnering with larger organizations that support a lot more entrepreneurs versus one-to-one.
For sure, legal services is one of the tools that our entrepreneurs use the most often. So thank you for all of the services that you provide. And it's certainly not the only one, but to your point, is we need to understand the needs assessment need to be quite nuanced, at the onset in order to be effective in help and scaling. What else? What other questions does that conversation bring up for you?
Maybe to help the conversation a little bit, what everybody has alluded to, but perhaps not said directly, is that we are working in very dark times for gender equality. The gender pushback, the gender rollback. We're certainly seeing it in our work, which is considered relatively safe on child rights, and still little policy gains that have been made over the past decade are being rolled back in almost every country where UNICEF has a presence. Our offices are reporting enormous challenges with simply being explicit around adolescent girls' rights, activism, agency, and power. It's a hot topic, even that. So what you're talking about, the explicit funding for minority groups, all of these topics are under threat and under risk. And it's where this importance of flexible financing for, I think, what you were talking about in the legal sector, which is all the things that go around the work you need to do. The organizational reforms, the individual care and support, the management to plan. I was learning from Yasmin earlier that when they do grants, they don't ask for a proposal with the ridiculous turnaround time that some of us big institutions do. They actually say, here's a year of setup, and maybe you want to talk about it, while you think about your idea and how you could really go big and make it work in the long term. So that flexible kind of financing, although for a targeted, explicit need that has to be asked for, affirmative action in the very best ways, is, I think, something that all of us can collectively never stop calling for. Right? It's really, we have to make such a noise about it. I think those investments are the best counterweight we have to gender rollback.
No, I mean, I think we're all agreeing to 2 points. One is that the ecosystem should be taken, right? So as an example, we are looking for health improvements in health, education, livelihoods at co-impact. But what we realized is that the domains of law and economics have an inordinate influence on national priorities, policies, resource allocation. When I worked in these countries, every time, at some point when I was negotiating the line item for family planning commodities, I was dealing with the Minister of Finance. And it was always a man somehow, right? Of course. So you have to invest in an ecosystem. I completely agree. But I think it's coming back to, and I wish we had more time, is how have we understood risk? We try and make outcomes-based things because we want to control for risk, and we look at risk as, right, all of these factors, but I think we have to fund with generosity and seriously look at the risk of not doing and the counter. So I would ask us to come up with some rhetoric that helps release us, and that's when the funding will flow with abundance in the way it should, with the generosity that it should, because that's how real outcomes and real gains are built. It's not through restricted, it's actually with generosity.
So for those who have resources, whether it's money, connections, whatever it is, you know where to invest. There's a winning stock on the market. And for those of us who are fighting the good fight, one of to your point about burnout, Lola, Banksy has this beautiful saying, when you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. And I found today so rejuvenating. Thank you very much for having us. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. So we want to continue together with you. Lola.
Thank you.
Well, as we close, I took copious notes. We're going to send out some final remarks after this gathering, but here's what I want to note. One, we are global, right? We reflect, my sister here in Nigeria, we reflect so much of the world that risk of inaction is a major risk. So I'm hopeful that this has reactivated more action in this community and beyond. The second goal we have for this gathering, one of many, is that we do represent the ecosystem. And so we want to fuel that ecosystem. These women here are just a few examples of those ecosystem leaders in our network, but I encourage you all to find your space and place within this ecosystem. And the last thing I want to note that's the biggest takeaway is listening. Thank you all for taking the time today just to listen and absorb the lessons from these wise women and from Henrietta. I think that we have such an opportunity. Yes, we are under attack, and yet we are resilient and we rise. And the last thing I just want to close with is the clear concept of legacy. I'm looking at Henrietta because not only was she on the Aspen board, not only has she created legacy opportunities for me as an individual, legacy opportunities for my colleagues here on the panel. Think about the millions of what that reverberates. We talked about pay it forward and that investing in a woman results in multiplier effects. That's no small thing. So let us remember that this is not a risk. This is actually a win. And for all of us, we may not be individual entrepreneurs, right? We may not be starting our own businesses, but many of us are in institutions that still need change. So while I'm a big promoter of the localization agenda and global health, we should get dollars directly to leaders. Don't forget those of us who are in institutions who are trying to change the culture and make the shifts. We need resources too. So to that end, thank you. Happy Women's History Month. And just thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.